State offices in North Carolina are being inundated with phone calls from confused residents after hundreds of thousands of people received a mailer littered with bad voting information. A public information officer told us by phone that by conservative estimates, 2,000 North Carolina residents have called the state board over the last 2 weeks, confused about voter registration mailers they received in the mail. It turns out the mailers, confusing thousands of North Carolinians, were sent by Americans for Prosperity Foundation, part of Americans for Prosperity, which is largely funded by the Koch brothers. And the mailers are just a small part of the millions AFP has spent in the state this election cycle to defeat Democratic Senator Kay Hagan. The reason for the confusion, the flyers were riddled with errors about voting that included the wrong deadline for voter registration, incorrect information about which state agency to send registration to, and inaccurate information about who to call if you have questions. In a letter to the State Board of Elections, AFPF said in part, "Our mistake was in taking our Arkansas form and applying it to North Carolina without revetting every detail." In a statement to All In, they said in part, quote, "We apologize to those who received our mailings in error. Our intention is not to inconvenience or cause distress, but to encourage more people to participate in the electoral process." They also said they, quote, "are stunned and disappointed by the response of some partisans to attempt to silence AFPF's voter registration effort." But in addition to being full with wrong information, the flyers were in many cases sent to the wrong people, including children who had passed away, or in one case, a cat.
The voters have been self-reporting how bad the list really is. We did have a call from one individual saying that their cat received a mailer.
North Carolina State Board of Elections is currently investigating. This voter registration drive comes just over a year after conservatives in North Carolina passed what is arguably the most restrictive voting law since the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Today, two key parts of that law were struck down by a federal appeals court. Court ruled that North Carolina must reinstate same-day voting registration and must allow ballots cast outside a voter's assigned precinct to be counted. Small victory for advocates in the North Carolina voting wars. And joining me now is Reverend William Barber, president of the North Carolina NAACP. Reverend, it's good to see you again.
It's always good to be with you, Chris.
So let's talk about the federal ruling today. How significant is this? What is it? It reinstates two key provisions. What remains in place?
Well, the voter ID was an issue because that's to 16, and we'll litigate that in court. But what this bill says is same-day registration. It has to be brought back. And out-of-precinct voting, counting those votes. The two parts of that bill that were designed to suppress the right of African Americans.
Now, voting outside a precinct, precincts are tiny, right? So if you think that your elementary school 3 blocks away is the place you're supposed to go, but actually there's a new location that's a block away, and you go to the old one, the idea under this law was that that vote would just be thrown out?
They would count them up and throw them away. And the reality is that because of the apartheid-type redistricting, it increase the change in precincts. And so this is not a small victory.
Precincts have actually moved around quite a bit.
They've moved around. We have districts that this legislature drew with a line right through a house, where the person in the front of the house went to one precinct and the other person went to the other.
Is that really true?
Yes, it is true. That's part of our redistricting court case that they've still not let out of the Supreme Court. But Chris, here's the point. This was designed for voter suppression. It clearly shows that these laws were targeted at African Americans. The Middle District got it wrong when they said, well, this is just a preference as long as people have a place to vote. The district court, the circuit court said, no, this is intentional. It will have a disproportionate effect on African Americans and undermine the right to vote. And that is a violation of Section 2 and the right to, you can't, not only can you not deny the right to vote, you can't abridge the right to vote.
And so this is a big deal. This is a federal appeals court striking down this state law, which many had called the kind of cutting edge of voting restriction.
Well, this is the first case after Shelby.
Right.
So this is the first victory after Shelby. This is big stuff. This is when the movement chooses to fight in the courts, in the street, and in the suites. It's the movement and the lawyers coming together. And it's not just the courts striking down the state, but the federal bench, the circuit for striking down the Middle District. In other words, saying that another federal judge got the law wrong.
So they were reversing. This had gone to the Middle District.
Exactly.
That's just so folks understand.
Exactly.
There's 3 levels in the court. There's district, circuit, and then you get the Supreme Court.
Exactly.
So the place this originated, the Middle District judge said that's fine. This law is fine.
He said it was a preference, and therefore it did not create irreparable damage. But he also said in the same ruling that the laws, that putting these laws in place disproportionately affected African Americans. So that you have a disproportionate impact, but it's not illegal. And the court is saying he got the law wrong.
Right. So you're getting rid of two of these. Two of these are struck down. They're being reinstated, right? Same day registration and this precinct thing. Precinct thing is nuts. I mean, if you make a mistake, you go, like, there's no reason not to count those votes.
But the question is, why don't they want people to vote? Just like you said about this Tea Party mailing. They lie about fraud. Now they lie in the mailer about the proper way in which you can engage in voting.
They say it was an innocent mistake.
Well, it could be innocent, but they study everything else. They claim to know everything about our movement. They claim to know who's partisan, who's. So it's amazing how they can be so right on everything and then so wrong on the main thing. It's disingenuous.
So what obstacles do you have left? It's what, 40-something days until the election, I believe, or is it even closer?
Well, what we're doing now is we don't know what the Supreme Court will do. They may say no now to the circuit. That's the possibility with the 5-4 up there. But this is a major victory. We're going to use this major victory to continue to say to people, now we must turn out. There are 286,000 African Americans that didn't vote in 2010. That voted in 2008 and 2012. And there are 400,000 white women that voted in 2012, 2008 that didn't vote in 2010.
Wow, that's a fascinating stat. So you have 400,000 white women, 286,000 African Americans. These are folks that are voting in the presidentials, 2008, 2012, didn't show up in 2010 when the state went wildly red.
Exactly. And we're saying that if you should understand, you must be powerful if folk are fighting this hard to keep you from voting. So what you can't do is give it to them. You must turn out. So we must fight in the courts, we must fight in the street, we must fight in the legislative hall, but we must battle at the ballot box.
Reverend William Barber, thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend.